afternoon, students. We're going to take our new lesson for the International Relations course. Today, we're going to begin by speaking about failed states. Now, failed states are states which cannot guarantee to their citizens 6 specific things. The first being security, second, protection, third, tolerance, fourth, basic education, fifth, some level of employment and housing, and sixth, other aspects we have come to associate with successful states. So these 6 categories are the biggest indicators of a failed state. Now I can provide you guys with some examples of failed states, which include Somalia, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, South Sudan, and perhaps Nigeria can be considered a failed state. Now, in the current political international realm of conflict today, we could also possibly characterize Libya and Syria in the category of failed states. Now, we are going to ask ourselves, why would a state fail? A lot of times that has to do with inter-ethnic conflicts. What is an inter-ethnic conflict? When you have different ethnic groups that are clashing against one another. And the second possibility is a lack of desirable natural resources or other products from world markets. So you have the problem of not having the availability of natural resources or basic resources, and when there starts to be a conflict within a state for these resources, or if outside actors come into the state and they begin to cause problems in terms of being able to get these resources, we would see this issue. There's also the third possible reason for a failed state would be post-colonial issues. So that was if a state was controlled by what had once been a colony of a great power like Britain or France or the United States. Civil war is also a big reason for failed states. A civil war is when you have a war within a state. And internal corruption. Now, internal corruption can be from so many different levels. It can be from the political, presidential level. It can be within the legislative structure of the state. It can be business, economic related. It all depends. Now, we need to focus on definitions as well today. Now, some states are considered non-states. Now, what is a non-state? It is when a group or a collective territory is not being recognized as being won by other states in the international system. Now, the biggest example of this would be Palestine, in that they recognize themselves as a state, but in the international world, they're not recognized as a legitimate state. Some other places would be the Turkish Republic of North Cyprus, where there are claims from Greek political realm in that Cyprus is theirs, whereas the Turks claim North Cyprus as their territory. And the Western Sahara, Somaliland, and Transnistria. These are other territories where groups within them have claimed state status, but internationally they're not recognized as such. Now, there is an index, a fragile state index in the United Nations that is used to characterize the levels that would bring us to a failed state. Each category now, let's read exactly what we have here. The Fragile State Index, which was developed in 2015, ranked United Nations member states on the following capabilities and characteristics, each valued at 10 points for a total of 120 points. So all of these categories, they give that you either take 10 points or you lose 10 points depending on the category. Now, first we have social indicators. with demographic pressures, refugees or internal displaced persons, group grievance, human flight, and brain drain. So these are social indicators that impact the state and how it can function. And each one is self-definable based on refugees or groups that have problems, grievances with the state. Human flight and brain drain, what does this mean when the educated people within a state, because a state is not functioning well or its economics are declining, they will travel to other states to work. The economic indicators, uneven economic development, which means you would have like really, really rich people or really, really poor people. You don't have a middle class. Poverty and economic decline, in that poverty is increasing and the economics of the state are consistently declining. Political and military indicators, state legitimacy, do people recognize the leader of the state as legitimate? Do they listen to him? Do they respect the authority of the state? Public services, what does the state provide to its people? Are hospitals open? Are clinics open? Vaccinations available? Court systems, what have you? Human rights and the rule of law, in that the state respects the human rights of the individual and that the law is being enforced within the state. Security apparatus, that they are able to maintain security within the state. Factionalized elites, and external intervention. Are there external forces coming from outside of the state to like conquer or take over the state? Fragile states, we're continuing here. There are some states that are more fragile than others. Those would include Pakistan, Cambodia, and Afghanistan as examples. So we see that there are these indicators that we've talked about. Things are progressively going downhill and they're not able to maintain these factors that we discussed. So they are falling into the category of a fragile state. They still are not a failed state. What do these states need in order to reassert their positioning? They need order, they need a functioning central government, and other requisites to return them to full statehood. They have not precisely failed, like I said, but they are at the risk of failure because we're seeing different indicators that are consistently being pulled down. I guess the biggest and brightest example would be Afghanistan. Till this day, there's a lot of instability and insecurity within the government within Afghanistan. Now, they have certain key characteristics of full statehood missing, like we were talking about a fragile state, like Afghanistan, or they are too weak to act effectively, like the central government isn't able to maintain security and control. Even within their territorial boundaries. We're not talking about in terms of them executing some sort of action outside of the state. We're talking about their inability even within their own state to maintain control. Now, we often find that there are common factors present in a fragile state, which would be there's terrorism that's active, internal strife of some kind. It can be political, it can be economical, it can be business related. It can be tribal, it can be religious, it depends on the state. There's corruption, which we would see on a political as well as economic level. Paramilitaries, that means that these are militaries that are outside of the central state. They're not within control of the central government. And then there's also a big factor in fragile states would be that they would have a poorly functioning economy. People are falling into poverty. Now, for you guys, this is a question that I would like you to write about and send me an email, or on WhatsApp you can send me in our group a response to this question. Now, what I want you guys to do is to apply one or more of the three principles: dominance, reciprocity, and identity. Now, we talked about these three key terms last week or the week before last in our video. So I want you to go back to the definitions and I want you to apply these definitions to a current critical situation in the world. For instance, we could talk about the challenge of North Korea's growing capabilities as a potential nuclear power, or to Russia's annexation of Crimea. We could talk about Syria. We could talk about any country that is facing some sort of outside or inside problem. But we want to apply these three key terms to that. Now, the question I want you to focus on is which might resolve the situation most effectively. Now, which one of these following principles, what change needs to happen in order for there to be a progression in the problem within the state? Now we're going to move on to our second category, which is expanded issues in international relations. Now, while it remains accurate that there is no government higher than sovereign states, there have been attempts to establish both a set of international laws through pacts, protocols, and treaties, and via international bodies such as courts to implement and uphold them. So we're looking at international law. This is something above the state because it's on a global level. And we do see an acceptance of this movement by states. Some states have more reservations than others, but international law is becoming extremely prevalent in international relations on a global level. Now, some of these laws that we have seen are upheld by pacts or conventions which states have signed, although of course not all states have been signatories to all of them. So there's protocols, there's conventions, there's pacts, and we see in the United Nations on an international level that different states sign on to these international laws based upon their states' acceptability of these laws. One example we have would be the Geneva Conventions of 1949 and 1977. These are very well-known conventions. And they incorporate 4 conventions and treaties and 3 protocols within themselves. So this is an example of a convention of a list of laws that the state is expected to uphold, and these are on an international level, international law, international level of accountability. Now, the Geneva Conventions and their additional protocols, they form the core of international humanitarian law. Now, I know this is dense, but it's the idea of international law that I want you guys to understand, and the names of these conventions, just so that you have familiarity with them. If we're going to go into extreme detail, it's a little above our heads right now, but right now what I want you to focus on is the idea. Now, these are the core of international humanitarian law, which regulates the conduct of armed conflict and seeks to limit its effects. What does that mean? And that these international humanitarian law, international law, the International Criminal Court, these are all put in as mechanisms to try to protect citizens, governments, individuals within states when conflict arises. And they also aim to protect people not taking part in hostilities and those who are no longer doing so. So people outside of the conflict are protected on an international law level, even if the state itself may not recognize this fact. Now, international law, besides humanitarian law, we see laws against genocide. What is genocide? When you kill an entire nation of people, like the genocide that happened in Rwanda. It usually has an ethnic or cultural pretense when they execute a genocide. The Jews during World War II, that was a genocide. Ethnocide is specifically killing someone for their ethnicity and other atrocities. Now, there are also laws of sea, laws regarding international postal services and International Labor Organization under the auspice of the United Nations and the International Court of Justice. Now, international law includes basic classic concepts of law in national legal systems. So we see similarities between international law, as well as the law that is being upheld within a state. There's also laws about status, property, obligation, and tort law. It also includes substantive law, procedure, process, and remedies. Now, international law is rooted in acceptance by the nation states which constitute the international system. So, like I said, don't overwhelm yourself with the details. The important thing here is international law is on a global level, but it has the same impact and idea of law on a state level. Now, we're going to close today by talking a little bit about morals and ethics. Now, while it is often assumed that morality and ethics are the same thing, there is a subtle difference between the two. Now, morals define the personal character of an individual, what my personal morality is, while ethics stress the social system in which these morals are applied. So ethics would point to the standards or codes of behavior expected by the group to which the individual belongs. So this is on a group level. We see that ethics provide norms for a group, for a community, for a state. Now, an example would be, for instance, national ethics, social ethics, corporate business ethics, professional ethics in the workplace, or even family ethics. So it's a broader category, ethics. Now, a person's moral code is usually unchanging. My morality is the same, but the ethics he or she may practice may be dependent on others. So ethics depends on an outside external factor, like I listed to you guys, like business ethics, there's feminist ethics, internet research ethics, Catholic, Islamic, or Jewish ethics. Our environmental ethics are also used in international relations. So in the study of international relations, we take philosophy very seriously, and morals and ethics are a very important category in understanding and applying international relations theory. So it's important that we understand the difference between the two. Now, we will talk about international organizations just very briefly. There are two types. There's either an international governmental organization or there's an international non-governmental organization. Now, the United Nations will be considered an international governmental organization. Now, I will send you guys the PowerPoint so you can review this more thoroughly. And there's also the European Union, which is another international organization. Non-governmental organizations are a lot more prevalent. There's like 3 million, it exceeds 3 million in the world. And these include Amnesty International, the International Red Cross, Red Crescent Movement, Doctors Without Borders, Human Rights Watch. And all these non-governmental organizations play key roles in addressing humanitarian issues and alleviating poverty across the globe. And we also see that with governmental international organizations, but more so with the non-governmental organizations. And when we come back and regroup next week, we will talk about human rights and principles. But in terms of today, your homework for today is to review the summary questions at the end of the chapter, because I will give you guys just the last few notes from this chapter next week. So I want you to review the questions at the end of the chapter and answer them in bullet form or in essay form. There's 6 questions. And I also want you to answer the 10 multiple choice questions at the end of the chapter. I'll see you guys next week. Thank you for listening. And if you guys have any questions, please feel free to send. Thank you.